Hi, welcome to the episode third. We usually see public relations has long been associated with the visibility, headlines, and coverage and attention. But today we see that that definition has changed completely. In a world shaped by culture, digital transformation, shifting public expectations and influence. So what does PR look like in the most when it moves beyond attention, when it starts shaping culture, behavior, and long-term trust? Today's conversation explores exactly that, the changing definition of PR and what it takes to build real influence in fast-moving, value-driven world. My today's guest is Adrian Ma, a founder and partner at Fanclub PR and Humankind Communications with over 2 decades of experience across consumer, corporate, and digital communications. Adrian has been the forefront of helping brands navigating not just visibility, but relevance, purpose, and impact. Welcome to the Influencers of Change, Adrian. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm very well, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me. That's a very kind introduction.
We are so glad to have you, and especially the person who has been in the industry navigating this massive shift. We would really like to know from you how PR has changed in last 10 to 15 years' time.
Yeah, it's changed massively. I think when I first started off my career, I'd say for the first 10 years of my career, PR in the UK at least mainly meant media relations, meant creating stories, pitching it to journalists and getting the coverage. But I think what we've witnessed, particularly in the last 10 to 15 years, is a massive shift where media consumption habits amongst the public have completely fragmented. So the channels of influence have shifted as well. And in particular, we've got the rise of different social media platforms. And for example, whereas in the past, PR meant, we have to write a press release, we pitch it to journalists, we get the coverage. Today, Trump might post something on Truth Social. There's no press release. Reporters are picking up from that, and they are writing their stories from that. So we've got that shift in terms of the influence of social media and how that's creating stories as well. And then even beyond that, I think over the last 2 years or so, there's been even further fragmentation. So whereas in the past, I might really enjoy reading a column of a particular reporter in the Sunday Times, a particular, like a food reporter, for example, today, I might actually follow them on Instagram. And rather than, the Sunday Times or that particular section becoming the influential channel for me, it's that reporter. And reporters themselves are building their own audiences through Substacks and their own audiences through their social media followings as well. So again, that's another shift. Whereas before, all of the power was in, the media brand, we're starting to see reporters and people of influence creating their own personal brands and their own audiences as well. So this is something that PR's been changing and shifting, grappling with over the last 10 to 15 years.
So you talked about the people's expectations has changed, digital transformation has been done, political disruptions that are coming in, and then the own personal branding, which is in place. So what do you think, what is not working that used to work before? And today we are not longer doing that, or we have shifted to something else completely.
Yeah, well, you mentioned a shift in society today. I think one of the biggest threats to today for society is misinformation and disinformation. Society today is more fractured than it has been ever before, particularly, in the UK. We've got the rise of the far right and we've got the rise of the far left as well. And what we're seeing is disinformation, which is becoming easier and looking much more real thanks to the rise of AI. It's fueling hate and it's fueling divisions. And this has the potential to undermine democracy itself. So I feel that PR is still very much playing catch up when it comes to managing and tackling misinformation and disinformation. And PR has a duty to do so because it's been at the forefront of information and influence for so long. It has to toolkit to do this. I don't think it's just a PR issue. I think society as a whole also has a role to adapt to this, through education and regulation. People, particularly the more vulnerable people, are being taken in by a lot of disinformation. They'll be looking at something and thinking this is a real ad led by a real person for this, and actually they end up losing a lot of money, or they end up supporting something and going down a rabbit hole that way. We need to be able to protect these people. So this is where I think we need to have better safeguards in place, and I think PR needs to catch up with managing misinformation a lot better.
So, to have better safeguards in place, what are the opportunities, do you think? Are there any platforms or the systems that needs to come together or work on it? How do you think this will look like in practice?
So I think, first of all, in the PR industry, we need to have code in place for best practice, so that if you are operating as a PR professional in the UK, you have a duty to tell the truth, to not mislead people, And I think
Yeah.
what we don't really have is a code of practice in the UK for that at the moment. We are starting to see that emerge in sub-practices or niches within the PR world. So, for example, you can see codes emerging around greenwashing, for example, and anti-greenwashing. We are seeing codes emerging around public affairs and lobbying as well. So it's starting, and that's happening. So I think that's one thing that can happen. I think also the other thing that needs to happen is an investment into educating people around what information looks like, and not to be more critical and have a bit more critical thinking, and not just take everything on face value. That might happen through education, and that could happen through primary school education, right through to helping people who are more vulnerable understand that to not take things at face value and to question things that are out there. And then the third thing is around regulation. So I think there needs to be penalties put in place for those who have been found to be misleading people, so that people understand that, okay, if I do this and I'm being bad, there is a downside to it, and I could face fines, I could face jail or whatnot. So those are some things I think could happen.
Yeah, those are the really good implications. And what are the trends, or what are the areas you see that this misinformation and disinformation has been massively spread as per the data?
I think at the moment it's very much with politics. So I think a couple of years ago, when the UK was having the race riots, that was fueled very much by disinformation about who was involved in certain situations. I think we've seen it very recently with the murder of that poor kid. I can't remember his name now, but there was a Sikh guy who stabbed him back in December, and we've had the sentencing recently. Nigel Farage has, spread misinformation about the person who committed the murder, linked it to small boats when it's not a small boats issue at all, and use that to fuel hate. So again, this is an example of where we can see that at play.
Yeah. And how do you see that influence is misunderstood in this whole dilemma?
So I think communications and PR is regularly underestimated. I think a lot of people still think that if you want to create change, you need to find evidence. And evidence alone is enough to shape change, whether that be policy, corporate strategy, or anything like that. But actually, systemic change requires bringing a lot of different people together and aligning a lot of different stakeholders around a proposal. So you need to make them feel something, and you need to make them feel something enough in order to act. And that's where strong storytelling comes into play. So, for example, people really got behind social media regulation and addressing toxic masculinity after that TV series Adolescence came out. So that's where storytelling came out. For years in the 90s, politicians and people have been trying to have stronger guidelines in place for illegal drugs and the policing of illegal drugs. But it wasn't until the story of Leah Betts came along, who died after taking ecstasy, and those pictures came onto the front page. That was really what moved people to shape policy. No one really remembers the percentages that you find in the research. They remember the stories. And so I do think that people still underestimate the power of storytelling.
That's actually credible, because if you want to have certain impact, you need to show some evidence, and not only evidence, you said stories connect with people. Would you share any example that you have seen which has connected with the massive number of people, or which has bring impact and that you resonate with?
Yeah, of course. I think Probably one of our most famous pieces of work was actually a few years ago now, back in 2022, I think it was. We were working with a client called Music Magpie. Despite the name of Music Magpie, what it actually does is it takes electronic waste like laptops, mobile phones, and it refurbishes them so they could be sold on as well. This company had just floated on the stock market in April 2021. They were ready to lead the charge as the champion of e-commerce in both the UK and in the US. With climate change high on the agenda, we wanted to make sure that e-waste was high on the agenda as well. So our objective in this story was to raise awareness of and educate people about the growing and overlooked issue of e-waste, put forward the need for electronics to be recycled, refurbished and resold, rather than just dumped into landfill, and then position Music Magpie, our client, as a champion of consumer tech in e-commerce and a leading voice in the battle against e-waste. So that's what our objective was.
So could you please tell us, like, what amount of work, trade-off, and you also mentioned earlier that there are a lot of systems and the forces and the thinking goes behind it to bring everybody together to make this whole story work and to create that influence that will get us to the positive impact that you want to create. So could you please share in detail more about the systems?
Of course, yes. We need the evidence. So like I said, you do have to have the evidence as well as the storytelling. When we were looking at the evidence, we found that the United Nations had done a piece of research that found that 53 million tons of e-waste is generated worldwide each year. That this is set to double by 2050. So it's actually the fastest growing waste stream in the whole world. And unless it's recycled properly, it's a serious threat to the planet. So it pollutes water, soil and air. And millions of laptops and mobile phones and electronics, consumer electronics, they rely heavily on reusable and precious metals that when they have to be extracted from the earth and create harmful environmental problems. And the G7 nations alone, the 7 biggest economies, use more than 15.9 million tons of e-waste each year. So this was
That's massive.
it's massive, yeah, and it needed to be addressed, but it was largely misunderstood. So we commissioned our own research, and it found that actually the issue of e-waste had very, very low consumer awareness. So 4 in 5 people in the country didn't even know what e-waste was. Nearly half were unaware that it impacts climate change, and almost half do not recycle or resell their old technology or donate it to charity. And 5 million adults admitted to throwing their old tech into the bin. And that's similar results were found in the US as well. So we knew that education and awareness around e-waste needed to be brought to the world's attention in a way that created cut-through, but we needed the storytelling to come with this as well. So that's what we started to look at. Where can this storytelling happen? And we looked at the media agenda, and we knew that the UK was going to be hosting the G7 summit in Cornwall. So we knew that all of the world's media would be coming there, and that could be our stage to make a statement. But when we looked at the agenda of the G7 summit, e-waste wasn't on there at all. So we decided to quite literally create a summit of our own. We created Mount Recyclemore. So Mount Recyclemore was a huge installation made out of 20,000 pieces of electronic waste, and it was a sculpture that was placed in where they're having the G7 summit of the heads of the 7 leaders of the G7 nations. So it looked a little bit like Mount Rushmore in the US, but it's made out of electronic waste, and it looked down on Carbis Bay where the summit was taking place. President Biden, Boris Johnson, President Macron, and all the other leaders of the world was made out of electronic waste, looking down at them. And underlying all of this, so we created a mechanism whereby for the month where we did this, where this was in situ, and for every single piece of technology that was traded in at Music Magpie, £1 was donated to a charity called Waste Aid, so that charity could put in place an e-waste education program for the people who are impacted mostly by e. So that's what we did.
I love the campaign. It brought together the creativity, the evidence, the messaging, the political leaders, and the impact as well by donating to other charity. What impact did it created after, like, you might have checked the analytics afterwards? Exactly.
Yeah, it was good. Great. I mean, it raised awareness of e-waste. So we had pretty much every major news outlet in the UK, the US, around the world covered the story. And I think in the end, we had 1,400 pieces of coverage online, print, TV, radio, podcast, including BBC, Guardian, Independent, CNN, DHN, Washington Post, Japan Today, Forbes, Jimmy Fallon's Tonight Show, James
Wow.
Corden's The Late Show, all of that. So media coverage, and we had all the social media coverage coming off the back of it as well. It was trending on Twitter. It even became its very own Google Place and Google Maps as well. In terms of a tangible impact, it generated £30,000 of donations for waste aid, which spearheaded in e-waste education in the third world. But also, so we ran that survey at the beginning of all of this, like how much do people actually know what e-waste is in the UK? Our findings were then 55%. When we ran that same story just a few weeks later after this, it was 61%. So it created a 6% uplift in understanding of what e-waste is and how dangerous it is as well.
That's huge. That's really incredible. And I'm really impressed by the campaign itself. And how do you think, I mean, digitally, we are still evolving with the massive transformation by the AI coming into the picture. How do you see that campaign still being relevant culturally? Like, how do you think that it might, like you might work on it in future, or is it going to evolve, or that was like a one-time campaign?
No, I mean, I think that if you took that campaign from 2022 and dropped it into this year, it would still just be just as effective because of storytelling transcends technologies and channels. If you've got a great story, you tell the story around a campfire, you tell the story on Twitter, you tell the story on a podcast, you tell the story in print. Story is channel agnostic, it's technology agnostic. It's one of the things that brings us together as human beings and gets us to cooperate over time. So as long as the story stands up and is good, it doesn't really matter what's happening with technology and channels.
That was so touching. You said that one thing that connects us is human beings. How do you connect your purpose always with the authenticity? Because being a founder and partner, you might also have commercial responsibilities as well as this is a purposeless organization. So we work on those campaigns, but you have to balance it out. So how do you still make sure that you have a purpose and you make sure that there's authenticity in the messaging or the campaigns you do?
Yeah, I don't think the two can be separated. I think you have to be authentic in order to be effective. And if you're authentic about your purpose, that's a double benefit. I think the way that we view this and the way that I view this with a lot of my other clients and a lot of my clients is that unless you're taking a long-term view, your business isn't going to exist. So let's take, for example, McCain. So McCain makes frozen potato products like frozen chips, okay? And it depends very, very heavily on agriculture. And if there's climate change and the UK climate changes and potatoes can't be grown, he doesn't have a business. So it makes absolute sense for McCain to invest in putting in place really strong sustainability practices and to support its farmers in regenerative farming in order to supply chain in the future. So in order for it to continue to make profits. So, we're working quite closely with our clients to take a very long-term view as to how is their business going to survive in the future? How is it going to survive the threats of climate change? How is it going to become more inclusive as we change in society? And how do you get ahead of your competitors? And when you start looking at it through that lens, you can see that, actually, purpose can be a competitive advantage here. And actually, this means that I'm going to be transforming my business before my competitors, which means that I'm going to be a better place to be around in 10, 15 years' time.
It's awesome because if you connect purpose with a profit, there has been shown in the previous data that it's always good for the brand's visibility in the long term. But we talked about the political drivers as well in current world, and we could see that there is quiet, I would say, perception that with the changing in the political affairs, it might be that businesses won't be focusing on the purpose side of it or the ESG agendas of all the organization. What do you see that? How would we make sure that communications won't be just performing art in future, and we still keep in mind that there is purpose that we all have to serve.
Yeah. Well, I think there's two parts to that. I think, first of all, you're right. When the Trump administration did come in, we did see a drop in a number of companies talking about their ESG programs and even a rolling back of them, particularly from big technology companies. But what we have been seeing from any polling of the electorate, from the general population, is that there's still a massive appetite for us to protect nature. And it might be called something different. It might not be called net zero. It might be calling about protecting our natural habitats and looking after our own communities. But there is an appetite there. And actually, recently, a poll was done in the UK amongst reform voters. And reform voters, they really want to see nature protected. They want to see their natural habitats connected where they live, despite the fact that they may appear to be anti-climate action, and anti-net zero policies. Actually, we all want the same thing. But the second part of that is how do we avoid being performative around this? We talk about having the receipts. So when we speak to our clients, we say, look, you can't just go into this area unless you've got the receipts. So you need to show that you're genuinely committed to making a change. And, that's part of the reason why when we did Mount Recyclemore, we were looking at, okay, you've got good heritage here. You've certainly got a lot of impact, positive impact. What else can we do? Where can we make some receipts? We put in place that mechanic whereby with every single piece of tech that was donated, £1 went to the charity Waste Aid. So the fact that we could turn around and say, look, through this £30,000 was donated to Waste Aid, that gave them the receipts. That gives them the right to play in this area. So before any of our clients come to us and say, oh, we want to do something around this and sustainability, we need to take a good look at them and say, have you actually written an impact report? And, have you captured other data? Let's do that first, shall we? And let's talk about capturing your data, getting it right, and let's make sure that we're not overstating the impact of what you're doing as well. So we work quite closely with our clients on that.
So you talked about the having receipts to show that you are creating real impact. It's just not a performative act. So you talked also about the having impact reports. And what are the other ways that brand could show that they genuinely care about their purpose?
So another example would be investing into grassroots communities. So, for example, Nike had an amazing moment when it supported Colin Kaepernick about, taking the knee. And they had that great big billboard, and it really divided the world. In the US, there are some people burning their Nike trainers and say, I'm never going to buy them again. And then you had a lot of other people like rising up to support them. Nike had the receipts to be able to do that because it had spent decades, lot of money and resources funding grassroots sports, and in particular supporting Black communities and Black communities ensuring that they are able to participate in sports. So when that moment came up and Colin Kaepernick took the knee at the beginning of a match, and Nike decided, you know what, this is our time, it had the right to play. So another way of getting the receipts is making sure that you're supporting the community on a grassroots level.
Oh, wow, that's amazing example. So thank you so much for
responsibilities. I think the big one here is around managing misinformation and disinformation, as I said before. So I think in the age of AI, it's really, really important to ensure that any information that we are managing and that we're putting out there on behalf of our clients is accurate and not misleading. I heard a great line from someone saying that as comms professionals, we actually write the first draft of history. So let's make sure that that's right. So I think making sure that we are equipped to manage misinformation, disinformation, safeguard the public is important there. I think another responsibility is our job should be to tell a message of hope. We are here writing that first draft of history. We should be using that power to create a better world, create a more hopeful world. show people that actually there is a better way of doing things, and there's a kinder way of doing things as well. So painting a picture of hope, I think, is another thing that we could be doing.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And well, everybody is being so hopeful and thinking, well, AI and SpaceX and everything that is going on, everything is in the future right now. So if we think about the future leaders who are maybe currently studying or even have just started their career,
Hmm.
what do you think that how this generation will redefine the PR? What are your thoughts on that?
I think they're going to massively redefine PR, and I think now, not to sound boring and talk about AI again, but I think it's the biggest story at the moment, and it's the biggest transformational force that we're seeing in society and in our industry. And I think there's two things here that people who are entering the PR industry are going to be grappling with. One is that influence is evolving. So influence is evolving in the age of AI. LLMs like ChatGPT, Claude, and Perplexity, these are becoming the new answers for people when they're looking for answers. And the way that they display their answers feels much more robust than a Google search, for example. And so understanding how to influence that through generative engine
Yeah.
optimization is going to become very, very important, and getting the tools to be able to do that effectively is going to be important as well. And, that's something that a lot of our clients are coming to. And so that's a channel shift, an influence channel shift that I think the next generation is going to be leading on. I think the second thing is an evolution of the tools as well. And again, so AI is massively impacting PR's tool set. It's allowing us to do more quickly as well. So, that's going to mean that we have, one person's going to have greater expectation in terms of their output. And I think, it's going to change what the career landscape or the employment landscape looks like in the PR world in the future. Maybe we might find ourselves in a place where actually future PR teams aren't working 5 days a week. It might be that future PR teams are working 4 days a week, but everyone's got a side hustle. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is there, but I think the tools are evolving very, very quickly, and the channels of influence are evolving very quickly as well. So those are the two things I
Yeah. I see one is hope and one is uncertainty,
think.
which both are very, very interesting things to have as a future. So
Yeah.
historically, there have been many shifts, whether it's PR industry or any other industries, and every industry has some things to unlearn. What do you think those are for PR industry?
I think the speed and pace of PR has changed hugely over the last 20 years. Used to be that most PR relationships between agencies and clients were retained, and now we're seeing much more project-based work. And I think I think the thing that communicators need to unlearn is this idea of consistency and continuity. And I think actually we things are better viewed through the lens of projects and bursts as well, and that includes teams coming together and going away as well. So
Mhm.
traditionally in the PR world, you said, this is my PR team and this is who I work with, and they'll be the same team until someone leaves. Actually, I think what we're starting to see is agile project teams come together for a short period
Yeah.
to work on something quite intense and then disperse again and be involved in a different project. And I think that this pattern is going to hopefully be a way for us to learn more by working with different people. And I think it's going to be really interesting as well. Yeah. So one thing I would like to see the industry unlearn is this idea that there has to be a level of continuity of teams. No, I think actually we need to have more variation in teams.
Yeah, I absolutely like the idea of having a child working team because then you have more opportunities to work on different projects and
Mm,
contribute and work with different people and also understand different perspective, which is amazing thing. And one thing that I've learned being like coming from India to this massive international place in the London and now shifting to Leeds, like changing so many places and meeting so many different people, like people are amazing. They have so much to offer. And if you have working opportunities with different people in different teams, you learn and grow massively, and which is amazing thing to do. So I think agile working is something I'll definitely appreciate if I have an opportunity to work in such an environment.
Yeah, I couldn't put it better myself. I think you've captured it perfectly there.
Thank you. Well, that comes to an end to our episode. Thank you so much, Adrian. It's been really amazing conversation and you shared so many good insights for our audience. So thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in with Influencers of Change. If you found this conversation valuable, please do follow and subscribe across your preferred platforms to stay updated on upcoming episodes and insightful stories. Thank you.